At the will reading, my sister gave my mom $50 million. Then the lawyer read a secret that made her scream. The first time I realized money could bend a room, I was 14 and standing behind a folding table at a church fundraiser. My mother, Diane, was laughing too loudly at a joke the pastor didn't finish, one hand resting on my sister Celeste's shoulder like she needed to claim her. Celeste had on a pale dress that looked expensive without trying to look expensive. My mother's laugh didn't match her face. It was performance. It was always performance when Celeste was involved. That same laugh echoed in my head 12 years later as I walked into the 7th floor conference room at Whitaker and Shaw. The sign-in sheet was clipped to a board by the door. Someone had underlined the meeting title in thick black marker, Reading of the Will, Henry Caldwell. Henry Caldwell, my father. The carpet was the kind meant to swallow footsteps. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. At the far end sat a long table with leather chairs, a glass pitcher of water sweating beside 2 stacks of paper. My mother was already there, sitting closest to the head of the table, like she belonged in that seat. She wore black but not morning black, designer black, the kind with structure and sheen. Her diamond studs caught the overhead lights when she turned her head. Celeste sat beside her, posture perfect, a folder on her lap. Her hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread called Grief, but make it elegant. Across from them, my father's attorney, Matthew Shaw, was arranging documents with the quiet precision of a man who had watched families detonate in the same room. I took the chair farthest from my mother and sister. No one stood when I walked in. No one asked how I was holding up. Their eyes did what they always did, registered me as a background detail. Celeste's gaze slid over my cardigan like it was a rental car she didn't request. My mother nodded once, polite enough that a stranger would call it warm.
Lena, she didn't say honey or sweetheart.
Those words were reserved for Celeste. I'd learned not to chase them. I placed my phone face down on the table, pulled my notepad out, and set my pen next to it. Habit. I'd spent years in compliance work. Meetings like this lived and died on what could be proven later. Matthew Shaw cleared his throat. Before we begin, I need to confirm identities for the record. Diane Caldwell? My mother lifted her chin. Present. Celeste Caldwell? Celeste smiled. Here. Lena Caldwell? I spoke evenly. Present. He nodded, then looked down at his documents. This will reading is pursuant to the last will and testament of Henry Caldwell, executed April 12, 2021, with codicils dated September 3, 2022, and February 18, 2025. The dates landed like weights in my chest. The last codicil was from less than a year ago. My father had been sick then. Not terminal sick, but sick enough that the family started talking about preparing. Celeste's perfume hit me faintly when she shifted. Something expensive and carefully chosen. My mother's nails tapped once on the wood. Matthew continued, voice steady. Mr. Assel said, Mr. Burster, you got magic. Caldwell's estate includes the Caldwell Family Trust, Caldwell Aerospace shares, several properties and liquid assets held across multiple accounts. My mother's tapping stopped. Celeste's smile widened a fraction. I stared at the condensation on the water pitcher and kept my face neutral. My father hadn't been an affectionate man, but he'd been consistent. He built his company from a small manufacturing contract into an aerospace supplier with federal clients. He loved clean numbers, clean contracts, and clean exits. He also loved the idea of legacy. That word, legacy, had been Celeste's favorite weapon since she was old enough to pronounce it. She'd always been our mother's extension. While I did dishes and filled out financial aid forms, Celeste attended galas with my mother, learned which forks to use, and posted photos of family with my father's hand on her shoulder like he'd chosen her. Growing up, I'd had an invisible job, keep the peace so my mother could keep the image. At 16, I watched my mother hand Celeste the keys to a new car because she worked so hard, while I was told I should be grateful my father covered my community college tuition at all. At 22, I sat quietly at my father's birthday dinner while Celeste made a toast about being daddy's girl, and my mother laughed too loud again, the same performance laughed, while I swallowed the fact that my father hadn't come to my graduation. None of it was new. The only thing new was that my father was gone, and we were in a law office where words would turn into numbers. Matthew Shaw flipped a page. Mr. Caldwell named Diane Caldwell as the primary beneficiary of the trust income distribution during her lifetime. My mother's shoulders relaxed like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Matthew continued. He named Celeste Caldwell as successor trustee upon Diane Caldwell's incapacity or death. Celeste didn't even blink. She already knew. I didn't look at them. I wrote successor trustee on my notepad like it was a routine term, not a rope being tightened. Matthew's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. He named Lena Caldwell as contingent beneficiary of certain assets and distributions, as specified. My mother's eyes finally turned toward me, quick and sharp, like she'd forgotten I was actually in the room. Celeste's smile did not reach her eyes. Matthew set one stack of paper to the side, reached into a folder, and pulled out a separate document. Before I read the personal bequests, there is an inter vivos transfer that took place prior to Mr. Caldwell's passing, which is referenced in the final codicil. He paused and glanced up. This is uncommon in a will reading, but Mr. Caldwell gave explicit instruction that it be acknowledged here. My mother's lips parted slightly. What transfer? Celeste leaned back, calm. Probably one of Dad's donations. He was doing a lot of that at the end. Matthew gave a small nod but didn't agree. He slid a paper forward and adjusted his glasses. On March 7, 2025, he said, a gift was made from the Caldwell Family Trust to Diane Caldwell in the amount of $50 million. The room changed temperature. I felt it in the silence. How it thickened. How it wrapped around my throat. 50 million wasn't a number people said out loud in normal life. It didn't belong in a sentence. It belonged in headlines. My mother's hand went to her chest like she was being offered oxygen. Her voice came out unsteady, almost dramatic. Henry did that? Celeste turned toward her with practiced tenderness. Mom, of course he did. He took care of you. Matthew held up a hand slightly, not to interrupt, but to maintain order. The gift was executed and recorded. There are signatures and notarization. The transfer is complete and legal. My mother's eyes shimmered. She let out a breath that sounded like relief, pretending to be grief. He always said I'd be okay. Celeste reached into her folder. I noticed the movement before anyone else, because I always noticed movement. Celeste didn't do anything spontaneously. Everything she did had a shape, a purpose. She pulled out a cashier's check envelope, thick, cream-colored, with a bank logo embossed in gold. She turned it over once like she wanted the room to understand this wasn't just paper. It was leverage. She slid it across the table toward my mother. Mom, she said softly, I wanted you to have it now, for peace. My mother looked at it like it was a crown being placed in her hands. Celeste, it's from me, Celeste said, voice smooth. From my share, 50 million. I already arranged it. I watched my mother's fingers shake slightly as she touched the envelope. If an outsider had walked in, they would have seen a daughter gifting her mother a fortune out of love. They would have seen generosity. They would have seen family. But I knew my sister's tells. Celeste never gave anything without attaching it to something else. And my mother didn't accept gifts. She collected them, displayed them, and used them to prove a point. She looked up at me then, eyes bright. Did you hear that, Lena? I kept my expression steady. I heard. Celeste's smile sharpened by a millimeter. It's important that Mom feels secure. Dad's passing, it's been a lot. My mother pressed the envelope against her chest like a photo from an old movie. My sweet girl. The words hung in the air with the same familiar imbalance I'd lived under for years. Celeste was always the savior. I was always the witness. Matthew Shaw waited, giving them their moment, because lawyers know when to let people reveal themselves. He then slid another document forward. For the record, the will instructs that this gift, both the March 7th transfer and any subsequent transfers made by beneficiaries, does not alter the distribution schedule outlined in the trust. It is separate. Celeste nodded like she already knew that too. Of course. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue she'd brought folded in her purse. Prepared tears. She leaned back in her chair, basking in the feeling of being chosen. Then, without turning her head fully, she said in a tone meant to sound casual, Well, that settles the main concern. Celeste's gaze flicked to me. We're all taken care of in the ways that make sense. It was phrased like kindness. It was the same way Celeste had always spoken, soft edges around a blade. I didn't respond.
I took a sip of water. Matthew looked down again.
We will now proceed with the specific bequests and conditions. My mother finally set the cashier's check envelope on the table in front of her like a centerpiece. Celeste adjusted her sleeve and crossed her legs poised. I watched the attorney's hands as he lifted the next page. I'd spent the last 2 weeks doing something my mother and sister didn't consider important, collecting what they left behind in plain sight. It started the day after the funeral, when my mother told me I could help by clearing out my father's home office, then watched Celeste walk out with his laptop in a designer tote like it was hers. I didn't argue. I didn't chase her down the driveway. I went back inside, found the small black safe behind the framed photo of my parents at a gala, and used the code my father never changed, my birthday. Inside were folders labeled in my father's handwriting. Contracts, tax filings, account summaries. A thin envelope marked personal. I hadn't opened it yet, not because I was afraid, because I understood timing. In this room, with my mother cradling a $50 million check like a love letter, and Celeste sitting like she'd already won, timing was everything. Matthew Shaw's voice cut through my thoughts. There is, he said, a sealed addendum, Mr. Donnell. Oh! Caldwell instructed me to read aloud only after the acknowledgement of the $50 million transfer. My mother's smile froze. Sealed addendum? Celeste's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in her composure. What addendum? Matthew placed a hand flat on a thick envelope on the table, white, heavy paper, with my father's name written across the seal in dark ink. I'm going to read it exactly as written, he said. My mother leaned forward, still confident, but suddenly alert. Celeste's fingers tightened around her pen. I stayed still, shoulders relaxed, pen resting between my fingers. Matthew broke the seal, and as he unfolded the pages, I let myself do what I'd been doing my entire life. I said nothing. I watched, and I waited for the room to catch up to what my father had left behind. Matthew Shaw didn't read the addendum right away. He paused, the way people do when they understand the weight of what they're holding, and adjusted the pages so they were perfectly aligned. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. My mother broke first. Is there a problem? She asked, a tightness creeping into her voice. We've already acknowledged the gift. Celeste smiled, but it was thinner now. Dad was very methodical, she said, glancing at the envelope. I'm sure it's just clarifying language. Matthew didn't respond. He skimmed the first paragraph silently, his eyes moving left to right with trained speed, his jaw set in a way that told me this wasn't clarifying language. I leaned back slightly in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. Before I read this, Matthew said finally, I want to remind everyone that this addendum is legally binding and notarized. It modifies no asset values, but it does provide context and conditions. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Of course. Henry loved his explanations. That was true. My father explained things thoroughly, especially when he didn't trust people to interpret his intentions correctly. Matthew began to read. The first section was procedural, why the addendum existed, how it was to be handled. Celeste relaxed again, her confidence returning as the language stayed formal and distant. Then Matthew's tone changed. To my wife, Diane Caldwell, he read, the transfer of $50 million executed on March 7, 2025, is to be understood not as a gift of affection, but as a settlement of obligation.
My mother blinks.
Settlement? Celeste straightened in her chair. Matthew continued, voice steady. This amount represents restitution for funds removed from the Caldwell Family Trust without my authorization between June 2018 and November 2020, as documented in the attached schedules.
The air left the room.
My mother let out a sharp laugh that didn't sound like laughter. That's Henry must have! This is absurd! Celeste turned toward Matthew, her smile gone. You're saying my mother stole money? Matthew didn't look at her. I'm reading your father's words. He flipped a page. I chose not to pursue criminal or civil action during my lifetime for the sake of privacy and family stability, he read. However, I required full repayment prior to my death to prevent further misuse of trust assets. My mother's face went pale beneath her makeup. Henry wouldn't say that. He wouldn't accuse me like that. Celeste reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. This has to be a mistake. Dad was sick. He was confused at the end. Matthew looked up then, meeting Celeste's eyes for the first time. The addendum was executed with 2 independent physicians present, both of whom certified Mr. Caldwell's mental capacity. Their affidavits are included. Silence again. He let it stretch. My mother's hand trembled in Celeste's grasp. I don't understand. I was his wife. Matthew turned another page. The schedules referenced detailed transfers made from trust accounts to shell entities later traced to accounts solely controlled by Diane Caldwell. Celeste's grip tightened. Enough! You don't get to say that, like it's fact. Matthew slid a thick packet across the table. These are bank records, wire confirmations, forensic accounting summaries. They were prepared by an external firm. My mother stared at the papers like they might bite her. I didn't look at them. I'd already seen copies. The addendum went on, outlining dates, amounts, account numbers, my father's handwriting visible in the margins of the scanned pages, notes written in blue ink, precise and unforgiving. Matthew finished reading and folded the pages neatly. The addendum concludes, he said, with repayment completed, no further action is warranted, provided no additional discrepancies are discovered. My mother stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This is an attack, she said, voice rising. This is character assassination. I want my lawyer. Celeste stood with her. We're done here. Matthew didn't move. We're not, he gestured to the packet, still unopened in front of my mother. There is one final paragraph. Celeste hesitated, then sat back down slowly, pulling my mother with her. Read it, she said, jaw tight. Matthew nodded. If any beneficiary attempts to misrepresent the nature of the March 7th transfer or leverage it to exert control over other beneficiaries, he read, this addendum is to be entered into public record immediately, along with all supporting documentation. The room felt smaller. My mother's eyes flicked to the cashier's check on the table. Celeste followed her gaze. Matthew closed the folder. That concludes the addendum. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother rounded on Celeste, her voice sharp and panicked. You told me this was a gift. Celeste pulled her hand back. It was. From me. But the will? Henry, this makes it look like... My mother's voice cracked. Like I took something. Celeste inhaled slowly, the way she always did before regaining control. Mom, Dad was paranoid. You know that. He kept records of everything. This doesn't change anything. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing. Unless someone wants it to. I met her gaze evenly. I haven't said anything. Celeste's lips pressed together. You don't have to. Matthew cleared his throat. Before anyone leaves, there are additional bequests to address. My mother sank back into her chair, suddenly looking smaller. The cashier's check sat untouched between her hands now, no longer a trophy. Matthew continued with the rest of the will, properties, distributions, timelines. I listened, noted numbers, dates, language. Nothing surprised me. What surprised Celeste was the condition attached to her role as successor trustee. Upon assuming the role, Matthew read, Celeste Caldwell must provide quarterly disclosures of all trust-related transactions to an independent auditor for a period of 5 years. Celeste stiffened. That's excessive. It's required, Matthew said simply. The meeting ended shortly after. My mother left first, clutching her purse like a shield, eyes fixed ahead. Celeste followed, stopping briefly at the door. She looked back at me. I hope you're happy, she said quietly. I tilted my head slightly. About what? Her jaw tightened. Don't play dumb. I didn't respond. They left together, heels clicking down the hallway, the sound sharp and brittle. Matthew remained seated, organizing his files. You okay? He asked finally. I nodded. Yes. He studied me for a moment. Your father was thorough. He always was. Matthew hesitated, then slid a business card across the table. If you have questions later. I took it and thanked him. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Traffic, phones, people laughing into the afternoon. I walked to my car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt alert. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We need to talk." This was humiliating. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message, this time from Celeste.
Dad's addendum is going to cause problems.
"We should handle this privately." Still nothing from me. Over the next week, the calls started. My mother cried. Celeste reasoned. Then Celeste threatened. She told me I didn't understand how things worked. She reminded me who paid for my college. She hinted that cooperation could mean support. I documented everything. Screenshots, voicemails, timestamps. At work, I took my lunch breaks in my car and reviewed the contents of my father's safe. That thin envelope marked personal sat unopened in my glove compartment. I waited until Friday night. I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper. On the paper, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words: "For when they get careless." I plugged the drive into my laptop. It contained audio files, email exports, and a spreadsheet labeled SHEDL, Disclosed Transfers, Revised. The dates went beyond what Matthew had read aloud, and every file pointed to one person who had been far more involved than the will suggested: Celeste. Celeste didn't wait long to get careless. She never did when she thought the narrative was already secured. 3 weeks after the will reading, she posted a photo on Instagram, black and white, tastefully lit. It was of her and my mother seated on a terrace overlooking the city, champagne flutes raised. The caption read, "Family, strength, legacy." Comments poured in. Hearts. Praise. "So strong. Your father would be proud. Taking care of Mom like that? Class act." I saw it during my lunch break, sitting in my car with the windows cracked. I didn't react. "I took a screenshot!" Then another when she edited the caption to add, "Grateful I could step up when it mattered." That was the first misstep. The second came a few days later in an email Celeste sent to the board of the Caldwell Family Trust. She copied me on it by accident, or because she assumed I wouldn't understand what I was reading. The subject line was, "Transition plus interim measures." She wrote, "As discussed, my mother is now fully financially secure following the recent transfer. I'll be overseeing discretionary distributions going forward to ensure stability and alignment with my father's legacy." She attached a proposed restructuring document. I downloaded it, saved it, and forwarded it to my personal archive. Then I waited. My mother hosted a luncheon the following weekend. She called it a small family gathering, which meant catered food, hired staff, and people who liked to be seen in the same room as money. The invitation arrived in my inbox, forwarded from Celeste, with a note, "It would look good if you came." I replied an hour later, "I'll be there." Not because I wanted to be, because this was the room Celeste wanted to control. The luncheon was held at my mother's house, the one with the circular driveway and the glass doors that opened onto a garden she paid someone else to maintain. When I arrived, a valet took my keys. Inside, the house hummed with conversation and the soft clink of glassware. My mother stood near the fireplace holding court, a silk scarf draped just so around her neck. Celeste moved through the room like a hostess in a campaign ad. Confident. Polished, untouchable. She spotted me almost immediately. "Lena," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "You made it. I said I would." Her smile flickered. "Of course." Guests filtered in, family, friends, a couple of former board members, a local charity director, people who knew enough to understand the significance of money, but not enough to know where it actually came from. My mother raised her glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said. "This has been a difficult season, but I'm blessed. My daughters have been incredible." Celeste placed a hand on her back, guiding the moment. My mother's eyes landed on me.
Both of them!
Polite applause followed. I sipped my water. Celeste took over then, naturally. "As many of you know," she said, "my father cared deeply about transparency and stewardship. That's something I intend to honor as I step into a more active role with the trust." A few heads nodded. One board member smiled approvingly. She was setting the stage. I stayed near the edge of the room, listening. When someone asked me how I was doing, I answered simply. When they asked about my work, I kept it vague. I was there to observe, not to perform. After dessert, Celeste tapped her glass lightly. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I thought it might be meaningful to share a few words from Dad." She gestured to the large screen mounted above the fireplace. A slideshow appeared, photos of my father at various events, smiling beside my mother, shaking hands, standing behind Celeste as she accepted awards, carefully curated. "This is beautiful," someone murmured. Celeste smiled. He was very clear about wanting his legacy protected. I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. Celeste continued, "Which is why I'm grateful we were able to resolve certain financial matters before his passing." She paused, letting the implications settle. My mother beamed. I set my glass down. Celeste's eyes met mine briefly, a challenge disguised as warmth. And that was the third misstep. And she had just referenced the transfer publicly. After the slideshow, people mingled again. Conversations shifted. The wine flowed. Celeste approached me near the kitchen. "You've been very quiet," she said.
I usually am.
She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I want us to be on the same page." I met her gaze. "Then you should stop speaking for me." Her smile tightened. "You don't want to do this here. I'm not doing anything." She straightened. "Good." She turned away, confident the moment had passed. It hadn't. The following Monday, I received an email from Matthew Shaw. Subject: Urgent. Addendum activation inquiry. The body was brief. "Have you observed any misrepresentation of the March 7th transfer? Please advise." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I replied, "Yes, multiple instances. I have documentation." He responded within minutes. "Please forward." I didn't send everything. I sent enough. Screenshots of Celeste's Instagram post and caption edits, the email to the board, a video clip from the luncheon, captured by a guest and tagged online, where Celeste referenced resolving financial matters. Matthew's reply came an hour later. "Understood. I will proceed per instruction." That afternoon, Celeste called me. I let it ring. She called again. Then she texted, "What did you do?" I didn't respond. By evening, my mother was calling too, her voice frantic in the voicemail.
Lena, this is getting out of hand. We can fix this.
"Please call me." I sat at my desk and opened the spreadsheet from the USB drive. It detailed transactions that extended 6 months beyond what the addendum disclosed, transfers routed through Celeste's Consulting LLC, then into accounts she controlled. There were emails between Celeste and my mother discussing temporary reallocations and optics. There were audio files, my father's voice, calm and clear, recorded during conversations he'd clearly anticipated needing later. He wasn't angry in them, he was documenting. I listened to one recording twice. In it, Celeste laughed. "Dad, it's just money," she said. "You won't even miss it." My father's reply was measured. "I will." The final file on the drive was a draft press release,
Prepared but never sent.
titled Statement Regarding Trust Misappropriation. I closed my laptop. The next morning, invitations went out for a special meeting of the Caldwell Family Trust Board. Mandatory attendance. In person, Matthew Shaw was listed as chair. Celeste texted me again. "We need to talk before this goes any further." I typed one response. "We are talking, just not privately." The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m., the same conference room, the same table. I arrived early. Matthew nodded to me as I took my seat. A projector sat at the end of the table, already connected. One by one, the board members filed in. Then my mother! Then Celeste. She took her seat with her usual confidence, smoothing her jacket, setting her phone face down. She smiled at me, like she always did, when she thought she still had control. Matthew stood. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We're here to address a matter triggered by the late Mr. Caldwell's addendum." He glanced at me briefly, then back to the room. "This discussion will be entered into record." Celeste shifted in her chair. I folded my hands and waited. Matthew reached for the remote. "Let's begin." And the screen lit up. The first slide was simple. A white background, black text, no logos. Sexual D undisclosed. Transfers. Matthew didn't speak right away. He let the room register what was on the screen. Celeste leaned forward slightly. My mother stiffened beside her. This schedule, Matthew said calmly, was prepared by Henry Caldwell over the course of 3 years. It documents trust fund transfers not disclosed to the board at the time they occurred. He clicked the remote. Dates appeared. Amounts. Account numbers partially redacted. June 14, 2018, $2.3 million. September 2, 2018, $1.9 million. January 11, 2019, $4.1 million. The list continued. Matthew spoke evenly, as if reading a weather report. These transfers were routed through 2 intermediary entities, one controlled by Diane Caldwell, one controlled by Celeste Caldwell. Celeste laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. That's ridiculous. Matthew didn't look at her. We'll get to your response shortly. Another click. An organizational chart appeared. Clean lines, names, LLC filings, dates of incorporation. Caldwell Consulting Group, Matthew said.
Formed March 2018, sole managing member, Celeste Caldwell.
Celeste's face tightened. I run a legitimate business, Matthew nodded. No one has suggested otherwise. What's relevant is how the trust funds moved. The next slide showed arrows. Trust account Diane's Shell, entity Caldwell Consulting Group, personal accounts. The room was silent now. No murmurs, no shifting chairs. My mother spoke, her voice thin. Henry knew about those transfers. Matthew turned to her. He did. That's why he documented them. He clicked again. An audio waveform filled the screen. On August 22, 2020, Matthew said, Henry Caldwell recorded a conversation with his daughter, Celeste Caldwell. He pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. Clear, measured, unmistakable. Celeste, this stops now, he said. Her voice followed light, amused. Dad, relax. She said it like it was a compliment. It's temporary. You moved money without authorization. It's family money. A pause. No, my father said. It's trust money. The recording ended. Celeste sat very still, Matthew continued. There are 7 such recordings. We will not play them all. He clicked again. Emails appeared. Subject lines. Dates. My mother's name highlighted. Celeste's responses beneath. Optics are important. We'll settle it before anyone notices. Dad won't push this publicly. He never does. The words hung there, unedited. My mother shook her head slowly. This is out of context. Matthew nodded once. You're welcome to provide context. She opened her mouth, then closed it. He turned toward the board. Per the addendum, any misrepresentation of the March 7th transfer triggers public record entry. That condition has been met.
Celeste's composure finally cracked.
This is a setup, she said, voice rising. She gestured toward me without looking. She's been planning this. Matthew followed her gesture and looked at me. Miss Caldwell, did you alter any of these materials? No, I said. I preserved them. Celeste turned fully toward me now. You went behind our backs. I met her eyes calmly. I stayed where I was. Matthew raised a hand. Let's keep this orderly. He clicked again. The final slide appeared. A scanned document. My father's handwriting at the bottom. Statement regarding trust misappropriation. Matthew read aloud. I chose restraint during my lifetime to protect my family from public scrutiny. That restraint ends if my documentation is ignored or manipulated. He closed the file. Effective immediately, he said. Celeste Caldwell is suspended from any trustee role pending review. Diane Caldwell's trust income distributions are frozen pending reconciliation. The board will initiate an independent forensic audit. My mother stood abruptly. You can't do this! Matthew met her gaze. We can. And we are. Celeste looked around the table, searching for support. None came. One board member cleared his throat. This will require reporting. Yes, Matthew said. It will. Celeste's voice dropped.
Lena, tell them this isn't necessary.
I shook my head once. It already is. The meeting ended without ceremony. No shouting, no security, just people standing gathering papers, avoiding eye contact. My mother didn't speak to me as she left. Celeste didn't either. The consequences unfolded quietly after that. The audit confirmed everything.
More actually, the trust filed a civil action.
Not criminal. My father had been clear about that boundary. Restitution, penalties, removal from positions of control.
Celeste's consulting clients distanced themselves. Her board appointments were paused.
Invitations stopped coming. My mother sold the house within 6 months. I moved into a smaller place closer to work, changed my phone number, set boundaries I didn't explain. One afternoon, months later, Matthew emailed me a single sentence. Your father's wishes have been fully executed. I printed it and placed it in the folder with the rest of the documents. I don't feel victorious. I feel settled. Money doesn't bend rooms forever. Truth, given time, straightens them. I learned that from watching quietly, and from knowing when to let the record speak for itself.